Hi everyone, this is Miss S from Excelsior Charter School, and today we're going to be covering Geometry, Lesson 6-5 on trapezoids and kites. This is some of the vocabulary and important ideas we're going to be covering, and it should all be included in your notes. So to begin with, we need to talk about trapezoids. Trapezoids have one set of sides that are parallel. So here, and these sides are both known as the base. The other sides are known as legs. When you have an isosceles trapezoid, these legs are always congruent. And your base angles are on the same base on both sides connecting to the leg. So they share that base of the trapezoid there. And the base angles of an isosceles trapezoid are also congruent. And that's the first theorem for this lesson here. The base angles of this isosceles trapezoid are congruent. So in this trapezoid here, they have base angles at the top here, angle B and angle A, and those are both congruent. And they also have base angles down here on the bottom, and those are both congruent as well, X and Y. And now we move on to the diagonals of an isosceles trapezoid. So remember that a diagonal goes from one corner across the shape, to the other side. So AC is a diagonal and BD is a diagonal of this isosceles trapezoid. And in isosceles trapezoids, diagonals are congruent as well. So AC equals DB. When we're talking about the diagonals of kites, over here on the right-hand side, you'll see that there are two diagonals. The longest diagonal here is called the main diagonal, and the other one is called a cross diagonal. Those won't happen, you won't see that all the time in geometry, but occasionally. And the important part to remember about the diagonals of kites is that they are perpendicular. So whenever you have a kite, its diagonals always meet at a right angle. So remember, that means that all four of these angles are right angles. So now let's go ahead and do some of the questions from your practice. So this one here asks you to solve for the variables. So remember that base angles are congruent, so these two angles here will equal each other. However, one uses an X and one uses a Y, so that's not very helpful to us. Instead, if we remember that in an isosceles trapezoid, these two bases are both parallel, we can take these two angles here, because they're same side supplementary to these two parallel lines, they must add up to 180. So 6x plus 20 plus 4x will have to equal 180. And we can solve this using Algebra 1. And when we do that, what we get is that x equals 16. And then we can take this x equals 16. We can substitute it back in up here, remembering that these two angles are also congruent. So 6x plus 20 will have to equal angle y. And when we plug in the 16, we use algebra to solve for y. And when we do the math there, what we get is that y equals 116. So for this question, x equals 16 and y equals 116. And now we move on to our next problem here, which wants us to solve for angles 1 and 2. In this case, they've given us a kite. So in this kite here, it is important to remember that angle 1 and angle 2 will be congruent, and that kites are a four-sided figure, which means if you were to add up all four of the angles, the two that they give us, plus angle 1 plus angle 2, it will equal a total of 360 degrees. So if we remember that angle 1 and angle 2 are the same, what we actually have when we do this math is 149 plus 2 of those angles, which we can call angle x if you wanted to, equals 360. And then you'll solve this using algebra. And what you get is that x, or each of those angles, is 105.5 degrees. So angle 1 is 105.5 and angle 2 is 105.5. And then our last one for today is another question from our practice, and it wants us to solve for the unknown variables. So once again, we have a kite, and it is important to remember in kites that our diagonals always cross at a right angle. So already we know that angle 1 equals 90 degrees. If angle 1 is 90 degrees, so is this angle here. And if we look at just this triangle right here in the blue, what we have is 90 degrees and 65 degrees, plus angle 2 has to add up to the total for all triangles, which is 180 degrees. And when we do the math on this, you'll get 155 plus the measure of angle 2 will equal 180. And when we subtract 155 from both sides, we'll find that the measure of angle 2 is 25 degrees. Good luck, everybody. I hope this helps.